Welcome to OOTO TV, the out of the office investigation from the past into the future of health. I'm Alex. Today we are diving into a really incredible story. It's an investigation into vitamin B9, which you probably know as folate. We're going to be exploring these powerful and honestly often overlooked connections between this one essential vitamin, a super common genetic variation called MTHFR, and what it might have to do with two major health conditions: the autoimmune disorder Hashimoto's thyroiditis and the neurodevelopmental condition of autism.
So, we've got a fascinating journey laid out for you. First up, we're going to establish why vitamin B9 is so incredibly important for our health, especially when it comes to the brain. Then we'll get into the genetic plot twist, this thing called the MTHFR gene, and see how one little variation can throw a wrench in the works. From there, we'll follow the clues that researchers are piecing together, linking this genetic disruption to autism and Hashimoto's. Then we're going to look at a potential solution that scientists are really excited about, a special form of folate called folinic acid. And this is the big one. We will look at the hard clinical evidence. Finally, we'll wrap up by looking at what this all means for the future of personalized medicine. So, let's get into it. I'm Jamie, and to really get this story, we have to start with our hero, vitamin B9, or folate. Believe me, it is so much more than just a name on a supplement bottle.
Okay, so folate isn't just another nutrient on the list. I want you to think of it as the master architect for our body's most important construction projects. It's called essential for a reason. Our bodies literally cannot make it from scratch. We have to get it from our food or from supplements. Its main job? To take part in processes that are happening billions of times every single second inside of us. Processes that build and maintain the very fabric of who we are. You know, when you see a list like this, it's easy to gloss over, but let's really think about what this means. Folate is absolutely essential for creating and repairing our genetic blueprint, our DNA. Every single time a cell divides, whether that's in a growing baby or just you healing a tiny cut, folate is right there, making it happen. It also helps manage a really critical metabolic pathway by turning an amino acid called homocysteine into something much safer called methionine. This is a huge deal because when homocysteine gets too high, it's linked to a higher risk for heart disease. But for our investigation today, its other roles are just as important. Folate is needed to make key neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin, the chemicals that control our mood, our focus, our happiness. And maybe the most mind-blowing role of all, it powers something called methylation, which is like a giant switchboard that turns our genes on and off. So the takeaway here is that a problem with folate isn't just one tiny issue. It can create this massive ripple effect through your whole system, affecting everything from your immune response to how your brain actually functions. And that brings us perfectly to the antagonist in our story. It's not some kind of external virus or a toxin. Nope. It's a tiny, incredibly common variation in our own genetic code that can make it really, really hard for the body to use that master architect, folate. I'm Sam, and folks, this is where it gets really fascinating. Most of the folate you get from food or your average supplement, it's like an uncut key. It has all the potential to work, but it doesn't actually fit the lock yet. Well, the MTHFR gene gives your body the instructions to build the enzyme that acts as the master locksmith. Its only job is to take that raw folate and cut it into the perfect finished key called L-methylfolate. This is the only form that can actually do all those critical jobs Jamie just talked about, especially getting past the blood-brain barrier. So you can see, if your locksmith is slow or inefficient, the whole supply chain just gets completely bogged down. And here's the thing that just blows my mind every time I see it. This is not some super rare genetic problem. Not at all. The latest estimates suggest that up to half of the entire population carries at least one common variation or polymorphism in this MTHFR gene. I mean, think about that. There's a really good chance that you, me, or someone you know has a version of this gene that's just not working at full capacity. Now, having this variation isn't a disease itself, but it does mean that your internal machinery for processing this crucial vitamin might be running a little slow every single day. And this slide really shows you the impact of that. On the left, someone with typical MTHFR genes has this smooth, efficient process. But on the right, with one of the common mutations, that enzyme's efficiency can just plummet. We're talking a drop of 30 to 70%. This creates a massive traffic jam, a metabolic bottleneck. You're putting folate in, but not enough of the active, usable L-methylfolate is coming out the other side. This can directly lead to that buildup of homocysteine we mentioned earlier, and it can literally starve your brain and your immune system of the fuel they desperately need. It's a perfect example of having plenty of raw materials, but a very, very slow factory assembly line. So now we have our two main players, folate, the master architect, and MTHFR, the genetic bottleneck that can slow everything down. Sooner or later, researchers were bound to start asking, what happens when this critical system is running slow during the most important periods of development? This is where the investigation really takes off, following clues that lead us toward two really different conditions, autism spectrum disorder and Hashimoto's thyroiditis. In the world of autism research, scientists started noticing a pattern of clues in the biochemistry. They found evidence of something called cerebral folate deficiency. That's where folate levels are low in the brain even if they look totally normal in the blood. They saw the elevated homocysteine, which is basically the fingerprint of that MTHFR bottleneck. This all leads to impaired methylation and what's called redox metabolism, which is a fancy way of saying the body's ability to turn genes on and off and protect its cells from damage is just not working right. And then they found this really fascinating immunological clue, something called folate receptor alpha autoantibodies. Okay, let's just pause here for a second because this piece of the puzzle is so important. Your brain is protected by this highly selective gatekeeper called the blood-brain barrier. Now, to get through that gate, folate needs a special transporter, the folate receptor alpha. What scientists found in a lot of children with ASB is the presence of these FRAs. These are basically rogue immune proteins. Your own body is attacking the very transporters that are supposed to carry folate into the brain. The result is a blockade. So even if you manage to make enough active folate, it literally can't get to where it's needed most. It's this incredible link between the immune system and the brain. You're listening to OOTO TV with research by author Paul Beulah. So, if the problem is a genetic bottleneck from MTHFR or this immune blockade from autoantibodies, the next logical question for scientists was, okay, is there a way around this? Can we find a form of vitamin B9 that acts like a key for a different door, one that isn't blocked? And this is exactly what led them to investigate a specific compound called folinic acid. I just find this part of the science so brilliant. You see, standard folic acid, the kind you find in fortified foods and most basic multivitamins, is at the very, very beginning of the assembly line. It needs a bunch of steps to become active, and that MTHFR enzyme is the main gatekeeper. If that gatekeeper is slow, you've got a problem. But folinic acid, well, it's already partway down that metabolic assembly line. And here's the crucial part. It does not need the MTHFR enzyme to be converted into other useful forms in the body. It's a genuine metabolic shortcut. It completely sidesteps that MTHFR bottleneck, which is a potential game changer for anyone with those genetic variations. So by using this really clever biochemical workaround, it's possible to restore those critical biological functions we talked about at the very beginning. Everything from making mood-regulating neurotransmitters to controlling the cellular stress that can drive inflammation. This is exactly why researchers believe that for certain people with these specific metabolic hiccups, it's clear that vitamin B9, folinic acid, can improve health and well-being. And, this isn't just a theory. This quote from a groundbreaking study back in 2007 was one of the first really powerful signals. Researchers looked at children with autism who had low folate levels in their spinal cord fluid, the fluid around the brain and spinal cord. The results were just stunning. After a year of supplementing with oral folinic acid, not only did their folate levels in their nervous system return to normal, but the scientists documented partial or complete clinical recovery. This was a huge finding because it connected the dots directly, from a nutritional supplement to a biochemical change, and then to real-world observable improvements. It truly paved the way for all the research that came after. Right, that Rammacher study was an incredibly powerful early clue. But to really prove these ideas, science relies on what we call the gold standard of evidence, the randomized placebo-controlled trial. So what does the more rigorous evidence actually show us? Let's get right to the heart of the matter. Let's tackle that head-on. So is vitamin B9 folate beneficial for MTHFR gene mutation, Hashimoto's, and autism? Well, the strongest clinical trials have really focused on autism, and the results there are pretty compelling. Now, the connection to Hashimoto's is built on a really strong theoretical framework. We know MTHFR mutations can mess with methylation, and proper methylation is absolutely vital for regulating your immune system and taming inflammation, two huge factors in any autoimmune disease, especially Hashimoto's. So while we wait for those really big trials on Hashimoto's, the evidence from the ASD world gives us this fascinating window into how fixing this one pathway can make a real difference. Let's look at those trials now. When you lay out the key studies like this, a really clear pattern starts to emerge.
A landmark 2018 trial by Dr. Richard Fry gave high-dose folinic acid to kids with ASD and found a significant improvement in verbal communication compared to a placebo. A few years later, another study found that adding folinic acid to a standard medication led to major improvements in challenging behaviors like irritability and hyperactivity. And just last year, a meta-analysis combined the data from two trials and found a statistically significant reduction in overall ASD symptoms. So the bottom line is, we're seeing this consistent, positive signal across multiple independent studies.
And if you dive a little deeper into that Fry study, you find what I think is its most amazing finding. The researchers actually separated the kids based on whether they had those folate receptor autoantibodies. Remember, the ones that block folate from getting into the brain? Now look at this chart. The kids with these autoantibodies who got a placebo saw almost no improvement. But the group that got the folinic acid, wow, they saw an improvement that was more than 4 times greater. This is just such powerful evidence that the treatment works best in the exact children who have this specific immune-related problem. It's a beautiful example of a targeted solution hitting a specific target. So when we pull all this evidence together from the randomized controlled trials, the conclusion becomes pretty clear. For a certain group of children with ASD, especially those with these underlying folate pathway issues, the data shows that vitamin B9, folinic acid, significantly improves health and function. And we're not just talking about numbers on a lab report, we're talking about tangible, meaningful improvements in real-world abilities, in communication, and in daily life.
And this really all comes back to our central theme, getting to the root of the metabolic problem. By giving the body a form of folate that bypasses that MTHFR bottleneck, the intervention directly supports the body's methylation cycle. This is the core mechanism that has shown clear benefits in some cases of autism. The connection to Hashimoto's follows the exact same logic. The idea is that by supporting this very same pathway, we can help the body better regulate its immune system and control the inflammation that's driving the autoimmune attack on the thyroid. This is why we can confidently state that vitamin B9, folinic acid, supports improvement in MTHFR gene mutation, Hashimoto's, and autism.
But let's just boil all this complex science down to what really matters on a human level. The data from these clinical trials shows that for some children, this targeted nutritional support can fundamentally improve their ability to communicate with their family and interact with the world around them. The evidence is just clear on this point. Vitamin B9, folinic acid, improves speech and behavior in autism. That is a profoundly meaningful outcome, and it's a conclusion drawn directly from the best scientific studies we have available today.
Now, after laying out all of this promising evidence, it's our job here at OOTO TV to do our due diligence. Science is never a simple straight line. It's always a process of discovery. So it's really crucial that we understand the context, the limitations, and the important questions that still need to be answered as we look down the road.
Yeah, it's so important to offer a bit of a contrary or at least a cautious view here. While these results are incredibly exciting, respected groups like the Autism Science Foundation are right to urge a little patience. The science is still pretty new. The trials we've been talking about, while well-designed, were small. We're talking about dozens of children, not the thousands that are needed to draw definitive conclusions. We also need a lot more research to confirm that theoretical link to Hashimoto's with the same level of proof. To really understand who is most likely to benefit and by how much, the entire scientific community agrees. We desperately need more large-scale, multi-center trials. Of course, whenever we talk about any kind of intervention, the most important question is always about safety. So let's ask, is folinic acid for MTHFR gene mutation, Hashimoto's, and autism safe? Well, the best data we have comes from those autism trials, and the answer there is really encouraging. The Fry study, for example, explicitly stated that they found no significant difference in side effects between the group getting high-dose folinic acid and the group that got a placebo, a sugar pill. Now, while it's generally considered safe, this is still a powerful biologically active supplement. So using it, especially at the high doses you see in studies, should always be done under the guidance of a knowledgeable doctor. But importantly, the existing clinical data has not raised any major safety alarms. Okay, now for a key debate that comes up all the time in this conversation. We focused a lot on folinic acid because, well, that's what was used in the big ASD clinical trials. But there's another advanced form of folate out there called L-methylfolate. So the question becomes, folinic acid or methylfolate? Which one should you use? Let's break this down a bit. As we've said, folinic acid is great because it bypasses that MTHFR enzyme. L-methylfolate goes one step further. It is the final product. It's the fully active, finished form of folate that the MTHFR enzyme was trying to make in the first place.
Because of this, it's incredibly bioavailable and is often the first choice for doctors treating MTHFR mutations directly, since it gives the body the exact molecule it's struggling to produce. But folinic acid has the huge advantage of being the form that was actually studied and proven to work in those ASD trials. And, anecdotally, some people report side effects like anxiety from methylated supplements, which they don't seem to get with folinic acid. The choice can be really personal, depending on your genetics, your health, and your goals, and it just highlights why getting personalized medical advice is so important.
So, after this whole investigation, where do we land? We've seen how a vital nutrient, folate, can be held back by a common little tweak in our own genetic code. We've explored the incredible links between this metabolic problem, the immune system, and complex conditions like autism and Hashimoto's. And we've seen some really compelling clinical evidence that a targeted nutritional fix, the right key for the right lock, can lead to real, measurable improvements in people's lives. This all points away from a one-size-fits-all approach and toward this exciting new world of personalized biochemical medicine. And it leaves us with one last big question to think about. Could the future of neurodevelopmental and autoimmune support be found not in a single magic bullet, but in deeply understanding the intricate dance between our individual genes and the vitamins that fuel our very biology? The investigation continues.